Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Okay, so as a fellow student, I know firsthand that English grammar can sometimes feel like an absolute maze, right? Well, today I'm going to be your guide. We're going to navigate the kind of tricky terrain of English nouns together using some frankly brilliant study hacks and clear rules that I pulled straight from our sources. We're going to break this whole thing down step by step. So here's our game plan. We're going to cover noun basics and the test, making nouns plural, countable versus uncountable nouns, collective and tricky nouns, 5 super common student mistakes, and finally, a visual grammar summary. All right, part 1, noun basics and the test. We absolutely have to start with the foundation before we jump into the advanced stuff. So, what actually is a noun? Simply put, a noun is the essential building block of any sentence. It represents literally everything around us. I'm talking about tangible objects you can physically hold, like a phone, or living things like animals, and even completely abstract concepts that you can only really feel, like happiness or love. But, knowing the textbook definition is one thing. How do we know for sure a word is a noun when we're just staring at a totally blank screen? Honestly, this used to trip me up all the time when I was writing essays until I found this massive shortcut in the text. Our sources call it the test, and it is incredibly simple. Here's how it works. If you put the word the in front of a word and it sounds like a complete logical unit, boom, it's a noun, like the boy or even the happiness. Those make complete sense as concepts. But if you try it with an adverb or a conjunction, something like the quickly or the because, that makes zero sense, right? English grammar can be pretty weird sometimes, but for sure, this is your absolute quickest trick to spot a noun.
Moving right along to part 2, making nouns plural.
Now, as I very quickly learned, making words plural isn't always as simple as just slapping an S on the end. For your standard, everyday things you can physically count, mostly you just add an S, like books or apples. But if a word ends in a sound like S, sh, or X, you actually have to add ES. This is literally just to make adding that extra syllable easier to say out loud. Try saying bus S instead of buses. Yeah, it's super awkward. And watch out for the special rules. A consonant plus Y turns into IES, like babies, and words ending in F, like shelf, completely transform the F into a VES, giving us shelves.
But okay, here is where we need to slow down for a second, because irregular nouns throw that entire rulebook right out the window. You absolutely cannot say child's or mouse's. One child becomes 2 children, one mouse becomes 2 mice. There is literally no trick here, guys. You just kind of have to commit these ones to memory.
All right, part 3, countable versus uncountable nouns. Figuring out what we can and cannot count is a huge roadblock for a lot of students, but the difference is actually really visual. So think of count nouns as individual puzzle pieces that you can hold in your hand. You can have 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces. They easily take plural forms and use modifiers like many or a few. But non-count nouns, they are like water in a bucket. You can't just reach in and grab 1 water or 2 waters, right? Because it's a singular mass substance. They don't have a plural form, and they use modifiers like much or a little. So, how on earth do we count the uncountable? Well, we have to use the container analogy from our sources, meaning you literally have to put that liquid or abstract idea into a specific unit to measure it. You can't say an advice or a water. You have to put it in a container. So it becomes a piece of advice or a glass of water. Next up, part 4, collective and tricky nouns. All right, so group nouns have their own totally unique personality. The crucial thing to remember is that collective nouns are words representing a whole collection of individuals, but they're bundled together under one single label. Think of words like a team of players, a family of relatives, or a class of students. And here's where it gets wild. The verb you use with these words actually changes depending on the situation. So depending on context, and this is especially true in British English, you use a singular verb when the group acts together. Like the team is playing well because they are operating as one unified machine. But you use a plural verb when you're focusing on the individuals inside that group acting separately. Like the team are arguing. They aren't arguing as a unified front, right? The individual players are arguing with each other. Then, there are the nouns that just love to try and trick us. Some items are made of 2 parts, like jeans or scissors or glasses, and these are absolutely always plural. You need to say a pair of jeans. On the flip side, some subjects like news or physics end in an S but are always singular. You say, the news is good, never, the news are good. And then you've got the true rebels of the English language, like sheep or deer, which literally do not change form at all, whether you have 1 or 100. Part 5. 5 common student mistakes. Okay, I have definitely made these exact errors myself, so let's look at the top 5 traps you really need to avoid. Mistake number 1, saying I have a homework. Homework is a non-count mass, so use some homework. Number 2, he gave me an advice. Again, advice is non-count. You need some advice or a piece of advice. Number 3, many furnitures. Nope, furniture doesn't get an S. Just say a lot of furniture. Number 4 is a massive one, a police. The word police is a collective plural noun. To talk about one person, you've got to use a police officer. And finally, number 5, the news are. Remember, news is always singular. Say, the news is. Honestly, if you actively check your work against these 5 specific examples from our text, you are going to sound so much more fluent and natural. Finally, part 6, visual grammar summary. So this is basically your ultimate grammar cheat sheet, summarizing exactly how we identify, pluralize, and correctly categorize every single noun we run into. If it's countable, you apply the S rules. If it's irregular, you just memorize things like mice or children. If it's uncountable, like our water bucket analogy, you never make it plural, but you measure it with containers. And if it's collective, you look at the context to decide if it's acting as a single unit or a group of separate individuals. Seriously, lock this mental image in for your next study session. Well, I really hope this explainer gave you a fresh perspective and helped you navigate these sometimes crazy rules. So, next time you sit down to write an essay or just fire off an email, which noun rule are you going to run through the test first? Keep practicing, keep applying those analogies, and you'll be absolutely ready to tackle English grammar in your everyday life. See you next time.